In 2008, SpaceX had enough money for one more rocket launch. Not one more year, one more launch. Three had already failed. The company was hemorrhaging cash. Elon Musk had personally put in $100 million of his PayPal money, and every last bit of it was nearly gone. The fourth rocket either worked or the company ceased to exist. And right now, in 2026, that same company had just filed to go public in what could be the largest IPO in history, targeting a valuation of $1.7 trillion. I want to tell you the story of how it got from there to here, because the gap between those two things is a lot more interesting than most people realize. Let's go back to 2001. Elon Musk had just made a lot of money from PayPal. eBay bought it for $1.5 billion. Musk walked away with 180 million, and his plan was to spend a chunk of it sending a small greenhouse to Mars. Not to make money, not as a business. In his own words, he wanted to take his PayPal money and, I'm quoting here, waste it with no profit on a non profit thing. He wanted to inspire people, show that getting to Mars was possible. He had the plan, he had the money, he didn't have a rocket. So he went to Russia. This was 2001, not long after the Soviet Union had collapsed. And there were decommissioned intercontinental ballistic missiles going spare. Musk figured he could buy a few cheap, convert them, and get his greenhouse to Mars. He kept going back over around 6 months trying to make it happen. It didn't work. The Russians kept raising the price on him. By his own account, I figured, look, they got to throw these things in the scrapyard anyway. You should get a really good deal. They didn't see it that way. And that was that. So he started working through the numbers. Could he build a rocket himself for less than what the Russians were asking? He thought he could. So instead of a one-off greenhouse mission, he decided to start a rocket company from scratch, with no aerospace background whatsoever. His own description of the early team. We started with just a few people who didn't really know how to make rockets. SpaceX was incorporated in March 2002. Musk put in $100 million of his own money. He hired engineers, set up in a warehouse in California, and started building. The first rocket was the Falcon 1, small, cheap by rocket standards, designed to prove the concept. The first attempt was March 2006, from a tiny island in the Pacific. It failed 26 seconds after liftoff. A corroded nut in the fuel line caused a fire. The rocket crashed into the reef less than 300 feet from the launch site. They went again in March 2007. This time the rocket got almost 180 miles up, nearly reached orbital velocity, and then the second stage engine shut down early due to fuel sloshing around in the tank. So close. Third attempt, August 2008. The first stage performed well. Then 2 minutes and 20 seconds in, the two stages failed to separate properly. The rocket fell into the Pacific Ocean. 3 failures. Every pound of fuel, every component, every engineer's salary, all of it funded by Musk personally. And now nearly all of it was gone. And this is where it gets bleak. Musk described it himself in a 60 Minutes interview. We were running on fumes at that point. We had virtually no money. A fourth failure would have been absolutely game over. Done. On September 28, 2008, Falcon 1 launched for the fourth time. 9 minutes and 31 seconds later, it reached orbit. First privately developed liquid-fueled rocket to ever make it there. Not just any rocket, one built from scratch by a team who, a few years earlier, had never built one before. 3 months later, December 2008, NASA signed a $1.6 billion contract with SpaceX for resupply missions to the International Space Station. When the call came through, Musk said he couldn't even hold the phone. His exact words, "I just blurted out, 'I love you guys.'" The company that was days away from shutdown had just become a NASA contractor. What followed was a string of firsts that kept stacking up. In December 2010, Dragon became the first commercial spacecraft to reach orbit and come back. In May 2012, it docked with the International Space Station, the first commercial spacecraft ever to do that. In December 2015, a Falcon 9 booster launched a payload into orbit, came back down, and landed itself vertically at Cape Canaveral. Reusable rockets, which the established aerospace industry had largely written off as impractical, SpaceX made them work. And in May 2020, SpaceX launched two NASA astronauts into orbit, the first time humans had launched from American soil in 9 years, the first time ever on a privately built, privately operated rocket. Now is 2026. SpaceX has filed with the US Securities and Exchange Commission to go public. They're planning to sell shares at $135 each, raising around $75 billion. The valuation they're targeting is $1.77 trillion, which, if it goes through, would be the largest stock market debut in history. A man with no aerospace background went to Russia to try and buy a cheap missile, got turned away, decided to build his own rocket company instead, watched 3 rockets fail, put everything he had on a 4th attempt. In his own words, "Fortunately, the 4th launch, that was the last money we had. The 4th launch worked." Or that would have been it for SpaceX. But fate liked us that day. 24 years later, it's the biggest IPO ever filed. Most overnight successes took about that long. If you found that worth your time, subscribe. More of these coming. Companies that spent years going nowhere before anyone noticed. Next one might surprise you.